So, in this segment, we're going to be talking about industry warning the British government that a trade war with the EU would have an immediate and devastating effect on the economy, which is true. If you think that the EU could stick on tariffs between 5 and I think up to 50%, so half your goods value would be added in tax, it'd be crazy. British business chiefs have warned Boris Johnson's government against suspending the Brexit agreement with the EU, warning it could launch a devastating trade war in the weeks ahead. So Frost said last week that the option to trigger Article 16 to suspend the Northern Ireland Protocol remained on the table if significant gaps with the EU cannot be bridged, but appeared to seek to calm the row for now. And there's a lot of contradicting information coming out about the Northern Ireland Protocol. So what we're going to do on the channel is just take each article at face value and talk about the different implications of each one. So Šefčovič welcomed the change in tone from the UK. Brussels is prepared for immediate retaliatory measures against the UK if Number 10 does go ahead and suspend the protocol, legal experts and analysts have told The Independent. So essentially, Šefčovič is saying, we're happy that, you've toned it down a bit, you're not as aggressive as you were, but best believe we're ready to unleash if you want to go there. Which, again, the EU haven't started putting on tariffs. It's understandable why, the more you think about it. But, Šefčovič still talking tough, but Frost essentially has toned it down a bit because I believe because of the American intervention more recently. But we'll see. Industry leaders in the UK said they feared a series of damaging moves that could hit British exports, further disrupt supply chains and lead to a freeze on investment. Let's not forget here the different things here that disrupting supply chains that could happen with export tariffs. Also the fact that if the French increase SPS checks and physical checks at the border, which the French could do, the EU could do that, and that would mean a further logjam at the Dover-Calais crossing, which will mean more lorries being stuck in the UK and less EU drivers wanting to come to the UK because they know they'll get stuck at that border. You talk about a lead to a freeze on investment. Businesses like certainty, investors like certainty, and with the UK already being frozen out of financial services on the continent, that's further going to create more problems. We are second in the EU for foreign direct investment, and that's been significantly falling since Brexit, so we'll see where we end up on that kind of list. Catherine Bernard, Professor of EU Law at Trinity College, Cambridge, said a trade war is a serious possibility. The EU is looking at a range of options. They are exploring routes to take retaliatory measures quickly. Also, the fact that if the UK does implement their version or our version of Article 16, which is a misinterpretation, saying that, we'll trigger Article 16 and suspend parts of the protocol, how it works is we have to give the EU 1 month's notice before we do anything, and the EU have to give us 1 month's notice before they do anything in response. So there are apparently clauses which allow the EU to respond immediately. I assume that's if the UK does something with immediate effect. So we'll see what happens with that. EU chiefs are thought to be mulling over a nuclear option of terminating the TCA if Downing Street triggers Article 16, which could happen. But I think based on conversations I've had with other people who know a lot more than I do, the EU will use targeted tariffs like they always have done. So they'll target specific industries. So maybe they'll leave whiskey alone because that's more of a Scottish thing, and target other kind of more English exports. This would put the UK on a 12-month notice period before the pact ends and Britain is forced to trade on WTO terms. The problem is we can't put tariffs on EU goods because we don't do checks on goods coming in from the EU, so we can't actually put tariffs on. So that will put us further in breach of WTO rules. But who does do checks on goods coming in? The EU countries. So they can easily stick tariffs on our stuff. However, the EU is also looking at whether to trigger a lesser known part of the TCA, Article 506, to take immediate action, according to Professor Bernard. So that's the one that the EU are going to be looking at very closely. Or as Donald Trump would say, very strongly. We're looking at it very strongly. It means that the EU would get its retaliation in quickly before needing to go to arbitration. The retaliation ranges from stopping fishing in EU waters to putting tariffs on UK fish going into the EU and then tariffs on other goods, she said. So essentially fishing for the UK will be a no-go. Let's not forget we do export most of the fish we catch to the EU because we don't eat a lot of the fish that is around the UK. Things like herring, we export those, and we buy in fish we actually do eat, like cod. So moving on, the French and other countries could also do more rigorous checks on goods coming in from the UK, which could gum up things pretty quickly. Talking about things at the border there. So David Henning, the UK director at the European Centre for International Political Economy, that's a really long and not a very catchy name. Like, come on, Henning. Said a decision by Brussels to launch retaliatory moves could have a very significant effect on the British economy. Let's not forget here, this is an economy that's dealing with significant inflation and is having massive supply chain issues. So this is further going to make it worse. He said, if the UK triggers Article 16, I suspect the EU may start with things like 100% physical checks on UK goods and some retaliatory tariffs on certain goods before deciding whether to go full nuclear by suspending or terminating the TCA. I reckon they'll go closer to the route of suspending it rather than terminating it, because suspending it means it can come back in at a later date when we've decided to have some common sense. But with the 100% checks thing, that will cause massive problems at the border for the UK in terms of exports, especially for certain companies whose paperwork may not be 100%, especially if they add things like rules of origins checks. That's a game changer right there. He added, if they do that, we could be back to no deal territory. With that threat hanging over the UK economy in 2022, it could lead to a freeze on investment, and the UK relies heavily on foreign direct investment. The British Meat Processors Association said it was increasingly worried about the prospect of both short-term damage and much higher tariffs on exports if the UK deal was eventually scrapped. I think that the EU's best bet is probably putting on very high tariffs on certain goods in order to make a trade war as short as possible. That's probably their best bet. So the UK has to come back down from the position we're at. Nick Allen, the body's chief exec. If I was the EU as well, I would talk about these tariffs publicly. I'd say, look, you guys do this, there'll be a 40% tariff on this export, a 30% tariff on this export. I'd be very careful about what you do from this moment onwards. That's what I would be doing now. Trading on WTO terms would be horrendous for the meat industry. Do you remember all those people who said WTO, let's go? We're about to see why no one wants to do trade on WTO rules. The idea that we're back to worrying about WTO terms is incredibly depressing. We're struggling enough with food inflation without a damaging trade war and retaliation measures. Another year of uncertainty would be devastating for our industry and the whole of the food sector. It means all the investment our economy needs could be put on hold. The Road Haulage Association fears the possibility of the EU to do more rigorous checks at Calais and other border points, causing delays for UK drivers and knock-on disruption. A trade war would not be pretty. Rod McKenzie, the RHA's director of policy, says it's a big worry for all of us in logistics and trade. But Rod, mate, I think you're just some Ramona, so who cares? The haulage chief added, if Article 16 is triggered, we know the EU is going to be cross and they're probably going to want to respond. I mean, I would phrase it a bit better, but he's not wrong. My big worry is always supply chains. If the EU retaliates, this has the potential to cause even more disruption to very stressed supply chains that exist at the moment. And let's not forget here, lorries that come to the UK from the EU don't want to leave empty, so they're going to want to take something with them when they go back to the continent. The problem is, if the French start doing 100% checks, they're going to be even more delayed. That bottleneck at the Calais crossing will be even worse than it is now, and what that means is those lorry drivers are going to be stuck there for potentially hours, maybe even days, and so they're not going to want to come to the UK, which is going to make exporting things to the EU much more difficult, because lorry drivers, even British ones, won't want to make that take that route, wouldn't want to export to the EU, because if you're being trapped at the border for hours or days, you're not making any money, because that's not how lorry drivers make money. They have to be constantly moving, constantly have stuff in the back, transporting goods. So it means that the cost of exports will go up even more because of the delays the lorry drivers will face, or they're just not going to come here. It won't be worth their time, which is further going to hit British exports, which have been hit very badly as is. Barry Dias, chief executive of the National Fishermen's Organisation, said a trade war would hurt everybody. He said it could have big implications for France, Netherlands, Belgium, Denmark and Ireland, all the countries which fish in UK waters quite extensively. There's a potential for all of us to be losers. True, that's true, but these countries have a much easier job policing their waters than the UK does. We would have to have the Navy kind of surrounding the UK at all times to stop these trawlers basically fishing illegally in our waters if that does happen. The EU countries have their own navies and they don't have to patrol as much water. So you are going to have sort of EU fishermen chancing it, I think, a lot more to see how far they can kind of push the boundaries. And it will cost a lot of money for the UK to police all of these waters. If number 10 does trigger Article 16, the scale of the EU response will depend on how the Prime Minister and Frost explain their actions and the extent of their safeguard measures, which is true. The EU will, it won't be an over the top response, most likely, but it's going to have to be essentially a big punch from the EU to say, you best sit back down. The government could decide to unilaterally stop checks on only some goods sent across the Irish Sea instead suspend large parts of the protocol agreement involving all customs standards and VAT rules. The EU offered a series of changes to the protocol, claiming they would remove 80% of checks on goods between GB and NI. So the EU have been very generous in what they've offered. The UK are saying, nah bro, that's not good enough, and the EU are saying, you best sit down or else we're going to trade war, son, and you can't compete with us, because again, the UK doesn't do checks on goods coming in, so we can't put tariffs on anything. And even if we could, it would be very much against our own interests, because we are very reliant on the EU for food. Most of our food is imported. I think it's about 60%. So if you're sticking tariffs on that food coming in, that's going to increase costs between 5 to 30%, and that is a hit the consumer will not be able to handle. Things are already bad as is. Inflation is really bad as is. If you push that higher by around, say, 10 to 15%, you're going to face a lot more people in poverty than we have now, and things are already not bad. Things are already bad on the Plague Island. Let's not make them worse. But that's what this government specialise in, making things worse. So fairly decent article from The Independent. We're going to leave it there. Frost being warned by multiple different groups here, the Americans, the EU, the industry, people in Northern Ireland, not to trigger Article 16. So we'll see what he does next, and we'll follow the absolute mad lad on his adventures of how to annoy the international community. But anyways, I'm going to leave it there. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, comment, share, subscribe, support on Patreon if you can, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one.